And thanks for staying with Morning Live. Now, in South African history, the dramatic afternoon of the 15th of November 1988 is remembered as that day, that fateful day when the 23-year-old Barend Hendrik Strydom went on a shooting spree which left 8 people dead and over a dozen injured in the centre of Pretoria. The Strijdom Square massacre was witnessed by a 17-year-old schoolboy, Bradley Steyn, who was walking to meet his mother at the State Theatre. And the event, which left Steyn struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, is one of the key events remembered in his book Undercover with Mandela's Spies, the boy who crossed the square. And Steyn joins me now to talk more about some of the events in his book. Thanks so much for coming through, Bradley.
Thank you so much for having me, and Molo, South Africa, Mzansi.
And of course, you visiting, no longer resident in South Africa. And may I ask, why did you make the decision to leave?
It wasn't by choice. I had to actually go into exile because ultimately the National Party government found out that I was working for MK, for the Department of Intelligence and Security, and they put a hit out on us, and I had to go into exile.
So these are some of the things that you talk about in the book, you know, infiltrating the right wing, and also, you know, your time has you crossed over from working for the Nationalist Party government to being recruited to MK and all of that. But there's so much I want to talk about, Bradley, but let's start at the beginning. Firstly, the book and the decision to write the book. What motivated that?
You know, I feel that the people that lost their lives on the square that day, their voices haven't been heard. They haven't been memorialized, and they've simply, the event has simply just been swept underneath the rug. And last November marked the 30th year anniversary of the massacre, and what we had done for the first time was actually found out what the names were of the people that died that day and the survivors, and you know, we are busy putting together a memorial for them, and you know, hopefully that's going to come to fruition this November. So it was very important that we actually gave a name to those that suffered, because I, from that incident, suffered tremendously, as you said, from PTSD, but I can't even imagine, you know, what those people went through. So I want to memorialize the memory of those people.
And I think, you know, I speak for many when I say thank you for doing that, because all too often justice isn't really served, especially for the victims. And just reading your account of what happened on the square that day, it was the first time that I had seen an account of how that actually went down. And perhaps if we could just dwell on that for a moment. 17-year-old Bradley going on your merry way to go and meet your mother, you know, at the State Theatre, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose. If you could perhaps just indulge us just for a moment in walking through how you came across the scene.
So I was walking towards the backstage door entrance of the State Theatre of Pact. That was just opposite the Volkskas Bank in Pretoria. And as I was walking across, I saw this tall white guy wearing camouflage fatigues, and I thought to myself, well, he's probably a task force member. You know, in those days, you know, we were a security state, and we had just come out of a state of emergency, and it was pretty common to see police guys, etc. But then I saw the reaction on the public's face as they saw this guy, noticed him, and then I noticed he had a 9mm pistol in his hand. And I thought he was trying to catch bad people or criminals. And then I saw him walk up to an innocent black person and he shot them. And that's when it dawned upon me that this is not a somebody trying to intervene in an act of crime or terrorism, and that he was a calculated murdering killer. And so I managed to find myself on the outside of a little wall. I don't know if you remember, the Strijdom Square had this little garden in between it with this little wandelpad,
Yes.
where people would sit on benches and relax and sit with their girlfriends and get off their feet. And he was just walking through there, mowing people down, just shooting them. And I was on the other side of the wall, hiding, watching this through the bushes. And then to the left, I heard, psst, psst, Kleinbaas, come here. And I saw these warm eyes and this young black guy calling me. And I went and I hid on the other side of the bench, and him and I call him kind eyes in my book, gave each other strength while we were hiding behind there. And without saying anything, we knew that we had to try and stop this madness. And we looked over the bench, and then this racist killer shot another gentleman that was eating some food. And I think Kind Eyes snapped at that point. He got up and he ran towards the north exit of that garden. And I followed after him. And as I came around the corner, he had just shot him. And I ran up to him and I put his head on my lap. And I said, as I was running towards him, Strydom lifted his firearm towards me and then saw I was white, put the gun down. So my whiteness saved my life that day. And I said, why are you doing this? And he said he's doing this for the future of white South Africans. And now Kind Eyes was terrified. He was bleeding. I had to stick my fingers in bullet holes and try and stop the bleeding. And so my life changed after that, as many other people's lives changed after that. And as we know, he was released 4 years later through the Truth and Reconciliation appeal process, which I think was a massive mistake.
And these are some of the things, that this book highlights in terms of the sunset clauses, for example, and some of the questions that we are grappling with today. You also talk about Chris Hani somewhere later on in the book, and the type of leader he was. There's so much to go through, the dirty war that you refer to and all of that. But if you could just give people a sense, better than I can, since you have lived through this and written about this, about some of the themes that you touch on in the book.
So after that, I was briefly involved with the National Party government's security under the directorship of the security police as a proxy front, which happens in the intelligence community. You use different entities. And one of the tasks that we were tasked with was finding this black gentleman that had just come back from Moscow, and he was a high-ranking ANC official, and we snatched him, we kidnapped him out of his township house, and we took him to a safe house in Warmbaths to interrogate him. And he said, "Hey, I can see you're a big boy, yeah, and I can see you're going to hurt me, and I can see you can do whatever you want to do to me. But let me tell you a story." And my problem was never with black people. My problem was with the Rooi Gevaar, as we were indoctrinated back then.
The communists.
The communist threat. And he told me about the Freedom Charter and what it stood for, and that it stood for all South Africans, no matter your race, your sex, your creed. And something in him sort of resonated and reminded me a little bit of Kind Eyes, and it was like my PTSD, my anger that I had been dealing with, because I became very depressed afterwards and very angry. I just used to use violence because that's what I saw. And all of a sudden the fog went away, and I ended up shortly after that joining the African National Congress under the leadership of Joe Naklala and Jeremy Veery and Andre Lincoln, who's the head of the anti-gang unit in the Western Cape today.
So, and this is what the book goes through, as Bradley was relating there, how he was basically convinced to switch sides by Khumalo, amongst other things. And it really is a fantastic book in terms of the detail in which Bradley uncovers some of the things that happen infiltrating right-wing groups and the impact of that, and a really fantastic detail in the book. But unfortunately, we don't have all the time to get into it. But if you can get it, Undercover with Mandela Spies, the story of the boy who crossed the square. And thank you so much to Bradley Steyn for chatting to us about his book. And if you can get it, let me know. We can talk about it on social media platforms and maybe speak to Bradley about it on those platforms as well. Right, that's all we have time for here on Morning Live, and we have to say goodbye. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll do it again next week. But Leanne and I will run through a few of your tweets just before we do that.
Thanks very much, Sakina. We will, because there have been so many tweets to our question of the day, and we certainly want to put those on air and show you. So let's begin and do that as we begin to say goodbye. So the question was, do you believe that the deployment of the SANDF on the Cape Flats